According to James chapter 3, verse 15, biblical wisdom is from above. It is heavenly and pure. But worldly wisdom is earthly, unspiritual, and dynamic. Worldly wisdom on this slice of fresh bread. Welcome to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church, Gainesville, with Pastor Brandon and Pastor Keith. Well, thanks for clicking on Fresh Bread. Fresh Bread, where we're bringing the truth of God's Word to a starving world. Fresh Bread, podcast 145. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to grapple with the attempt assassination on our president on Saturday night. If you're listening to this, this is when we're recording it, was after that has happened. And what we're going to do, what we're going to wrestle with, what we're going to grapple with, is the difference between worldly knowledge, worldly wisdom, and biblical knowledge and wisdom. And the reason that we're doing this is because the man who was trying to take out President Trump, he was a highly educated man. His name was Cole Thomas Allen. He was a 31-year-old. He had an engineering degree from Caltech. So this is a pretty smart guy. He's sharp. He was a tutor. He was also working on doing video games, and that takes some skill as well. So what happened? Why did he snap? How did he go nuts? We don't know, but we're going to grapple with that. And so today, again, we're going to look at worldly wisdom, which is what Cole Thomas had. He had a truckload of that, and then also biblical wisdom, and we're going to compare the two. And so I'm Pastor Keith. He's the guy on the other side, the guy over there with the beard. That's Pastor Brandon. Pastor Brandon, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
I always say if there was a town called Wow, you would be the mayor of that town. Because
town called Wow?
You are Wow, man.
Oh, well, there you go. They've been described as a lot of things. I don't know about that one.
But you would be the mayor of Wow, because that's what you are. You always wow me.
Wow.
So anyway, we're going to grapple with this, and we're going to start by, I'm just going to read James chapter 3 and verses 13 through 18. And this is, I love how James states this, because this is kind of what we're seeing in our world today. We're going to compare these two, godly wisdom, biblical wisdom, and worldly wisdom. James 3, starting at verse 13, says this: "Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good conduct his works in gentleness of wisdom." Verse 14 says, "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth." Verse 15 says, "This wisdom is not coming down from above, but is earthly, natural, dynamic." Verse 16 says, "For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder and every evil practice." Verse 17, "But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruits, without doubting, without hypocrisy." And then verse 18, "And the fruit of righteousness is shown in peace by those who make peace." Boy, how James states this right here, it really shows a difference between our worldly wisdom and biblical wisdom. And Pastor Brandon, this is what we're really seeing in the world, is it not? When we look at the chaos that's going on, even in our country and in the world, this is what we're really seeing, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think we would both agree that the Lord has given us over to, that He's withdrawn His hand of blessing or is currently withdrawing it. I don't think it's necessarily something that happens overnight. The gavel falls, but I think He's slowly removing that hand of blessing on our nation, and so we're seeing more and more of things like what's happened with this guy. Not that it's never happened before. It's interesting because I was thinking about it, and there's always been worldly wisdom versus wisdom from above, and I was thinking about like John Wilkes Booth is probably the closest parallel that I can find to this situation where you had a guy that was an actor, was pretty accomplished and well-known, and yet, kind of snapped and went and, tried to kill Abraham, or did actually succeed in killing Abraham Lincoln. And so, and that's kind of similar to what we're seeing here. I think what's different is that it seems to be happening at an alarming rate. I don't know if you remember, but there was always that anybody it's starting with Abraham Lincoln. I think 1860. Then you had every year that and a president was elected in a year that ended in zero.
Yeah.
They were assassinated all the way till 1980, and in 1980, Reagan was elected, but then he had an assassination attempt against him, and so in 1980 and 2000, they kind of broke that string a little bit. So, yeah, But what we're finding now, I mean, this is the third attempt on Donald Trump, and so. And I of the three, the only one that was serious in the sense of could it have succeeded? That would have been the one that they're in Iowa, right? And then the one at his golf course, I guess he could have potentially succeeded as well because he was hidden, and if the Secret Service hadn't picked up on him, he would have potentially gotten a shot off at Trump. But this guy, really, that's what makes. To me, it makes me sad as a guy that, that just basically he had no chance. And I think he knew he had no chance. He's not getting to the president. As lax as security was, which was surprising, he's not getting to the president. And so, what I really would like to do is really kind of delve into what brings a person to that point. What brings a person to do what he's doing, and you bring up worldly wisdom, and I think it's really being immersed. It's really being just totally influenced by worldly wisdom that brings someone to that position.
Yeah, and that's where I want to go today. And you mentioned the presidents. We had almost every 20 years: Abraham Lincoln, James A. Garfield, William McKinley, and John F. Kennedy, and then Ronald Reagan. So every 20 years, some president was either killed or shot.
Yeah, 1940 was, I guess that was a skip.
Yeah, I think that was an attempt. Was it?
Did FDR, is that who?
Yeah. I think
FDR actually didn't survive that term, right? Because he died before the election. He died, because Truman became president before the end of the war in 1945. So I don't know what year he actually became president.
He died April 12th, 1945.
Yeah, he did. He died in office, even though it wasn't an assassination.
Yeah. And Andrew Jackson, there was an attempt on his life in 1835, and even Harry S. Truman had one in 1950. Those were all failed. And then, of course, Theodore Roosevelt was shot, but he recovered. Reagan was shot. He recovered. In fact, Reagan was shot in the same building, the Washington Hilton, the attempt on Trump on Saturday night.
Oh yeah, I didn't make that connection, but I knew that. So yeah.
Yeah, it's just crazy. But okay, let's dive into this. So we were talking about this guy. This young man, young, but he's 31, Cole Thomas Allen. He's an engineering graduate, right? Engineering degree from Caltech, very high, prestigious university. And like you said, he's got this worldly wisdom, right? But he really engrossed in the leftist, we call it the leftist ideology, where all these, the stuff that's thrown out there. I don't know if you've heard all the stuff that's come out against Trump, that he's a pedophile, he's Hitler, he's all this stuff. So he bought into all this, and it just kind of like was a little snowball that just rolled down the hill and got massive until he got to the point where, do you think he went nuts, or do you think it's like it talks about in James, from it's dynamic, this wisdom that's not coming down from above. It's certainly earthly, natural. So what do you think? How do we look at this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's definitely demonic for sure, demonically influenced. I mean, the things that he's doing or that he believed, I think, are demonically influenced. And it's interesting because some people may struggle with what I'm about to say, but I think it's true. You brought up that he's an engineer, that he went to Caltech, which is a prestigious school, and therefore you were saying that you were extrapolating that the guy was highly intelligent, and maybe he is. I'm not trying to disparage him at any level that way, but I wonder if part of the formation of this man was that I wonder if you went back and looked, and I've actually seen some commentators bring this up, so I'm not the only one thinking this, but I wonder if you go back and look at why he was admitted to Caltech, because it's interesting, because he was Caltech engineer, and he even had some kind of, they showed him on a television show with an invention that he had, and didn't say how good the invention was. It just said he had invented this thing. It was something with a wheelchair that something that to help with people in wheelchairs. But it's interesting because I just wonder if that was part of his radicalization, because if he was admitted to that school through DEI DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, if he was admitted there because of that and not because of his test scores and ability, then he's going to. And part of the clue that may be the case is that he was a tutor, he was a teacher. So, and I'm not saying, it's interesting because I went to engineering school and there was a girl that was there with me, and I studied with her a lot, and she actually got out and became a teacher. And so, but she chose to do that, and maybe that's what this guy did as well. But a lot of times when somebody does that, it's because they don't measure up where they're at. And engineering is a demanding profession. It's demanding in school. It's demanding, and it's that the expectation it has of you academically. And so, so I wonder if, that was part of the radicalization, because he didn't quite measure up, yet he was pushed through because of DEI policies. And so when he graduated, he didn't get the same opportunities as some of his colleagues in school, as the students that went through school with him. And so I just wonder. I mean, I can't prove that. I can't say for sure. But I just wonder if that was part of the radicalization that we're seeing. And, and it really, if that's the case, then, and I think this is the case in some cases, that's what happens. And it actually has a, almost an opposite effect of what they are stating that they intend to do with DEI. DEI is, giving them the opportunities, right? Because they're oppressed and aren't given the opportunities. But if they're only given the opportunities, then they're going to do well. They're going to excel, in the right situation. And really, that's the only reason why, white males succeed, is because they've been put in the right situation. Whereas that, what can happen, or what does happen a lot of times, is that instead of them excelling, they end up realizing that they're falling short, and it can't be their fault, because they've been drilled. It's been drilled in their head that nothing is their fault. Like that they don't measure up because of, something that's deficient in them. It's not that, it's something that's deficient in the system. And I think it can cause guys like that to be radicalized.
Are you saying that worldly wisdom is focusing on like the temporal gain and self-promotion, whereas biblical wisdom would focus more on eternal truths and righteousness and honoring God? So you get this worldly wisdom, which is driven by selfish ambition. There's a lot of envy in there, a lot of arrogance. So are you?
And I mean, I think that's part of DEI.
And that's what you're saying, is this guy may have been a DEI guy?
Yeah,
Is that your theory or a good theory?
It's the pattern. So let's just say that he fits the pattern.
Okay.
The fact that he wasn't an engineer, that he wasn't practicing as an engineer after graduating with an engineering education, tells me that there might have been something wrong. That, why wouldn't he have been practicing engineering? Why did he choose to go teach school? And knowing and having gone through engineering, it is a very difficult discipline, and not just anybody can do it. Not just anybody has that talent and ability. And I mean, that's not a shot at it. I mean, there's some people, many people can't. And, it is what it is. And so, but if you push somebody through and you graduate them and they're not fit, they're not competent to do the work, then what happens is that because they've been conditioned all along that it's not their fault, that it's the system's fault, then that just continues to radicalize someone. I don't know if I'm making sense or not, but
yeah, no, I was going to ask you, because you work in the engineering world as well. You have, and so if somebody graduate, let's say I graduate, let's say I'm a DEI and I graduate from Caltech, but I'm not as smart as you guys. Would you hire me still? Because if it's a if it's a DEI hire, let's say your company needs someone like me to fit some kind of, government thing. So would you still hire me, or would you just be like, well, we can't because, we're constructing bridges and bridges have to meet a certain thing and this guy can't. He can't design a bridge that holds the weight. Or you know what I mean? Something like that.
Yeah.
Or,
Well, I think in terms of engineering, it's one of those professions that has been least affected or less affected. I shouldn't say least affected, less affected by DEI because of what you're talking about, that either you have the ability or you don't. And, if you don't have the ability, it's dangerous to hire somebody who, and I mean, we're seeing some of that. We're seeing, airplane pilots being hired and because of DEI policies. And then, we're seeing less safe, let things being less safe because of these people. And so we are seeing some of that. And I'm not saying engineering has been not affected by it, but it's probably less affected by it. And so I would say if somebody struggled to get through school and doesn't interview well, I would say that they would have a hard time getting a job. That's even today in terms of, I think there'd be less DEI hires in the engineering field than in some other fields that might happen or might be out there.
I agree. I think that's crazy when you think about, like, I don't know if you've heard this too, that there are they're hiring truck drivers who can't read English. They can't read road signs. I mean, I think I don't think you can do that, but that's what they're doing because there has to be a certain quota of, guys meeting this and that. And I just think that's crazy. I mean, I think we are living in such weird times where, where someone, could be doing something like, I don't know, important, and then it could blow up in their face. Like it doesn't make sense to me the way the world is moving in that way.
But I think I think there's some, at least in this situation, I think there's the recipe for being radicalized. And so it's interesting. How can a guy that's so well educated and seems to have the world at its, by the tail, how can that guy actually do this kind of thing? And I think that maybe there's more than meets the eye. And I think maybe he was more radicalized than you might think because of the situation and because the system radicalized him. And I think what is scary about that is that there is a large portion, especially on the Democratic, liberal, progressive side. I think that there's becoming more and more of these people who are being radicalized, and we're seeing it in the transsexual community where, it's this kind of this idea that I'm not. It's this worldly wisdom, going back to your opening, that there's this worldly wisdom that it's not my fault. It's not, it's because of how I was raised or how I was born. I was born, in the wrong body. I was born in an oppressed situation, and therefore I didn't have as much opportunity, and that's why I didn't rise to the level that I, could have gone to if I'd have had the right situation. And I think that the more way that that gets preached, the more radicalized people are. And so when a guy like Trump stands up and says, this is, these things, I mean, Trump is a guy that's, he's been very vocal, obviously, about what he believes. And he's been very vocal about, what he believes to be true and right or wrong. I mean, there's things that I disagree with Trump about, obviously, but I think that when you mix the two and you have a guy that's like Trump, who is so strong as a personality and the things that he's saying, and you have people that are being radicalized on the other side, it's a recipe for disaster. And I think that's why we're seeing more and more of these happen. We've had in the first, since when did he get elected?
November of 2024 and took office January 20th, 2025.
It's hard to keep up with everything. And so he was elected in 24, been in office for about 16 months now. But if you go back to the situation, at the first attempt, from that time forward has been probably 20, 21 months. And I don't know exactly, but in 20 months, let's just say, we've had 3 different assassination attempts on him. And I think that there's something fundamentally wrong with people. And with the situation that's creating this. And I wonder if it's really this idea that, of the oppressed versus the oppressor ideology that's out there.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask you that we have this socialist, communist, that is gaining ground rapidly in this country and in the world, really. And we have like two, I think would you agree that there's kind of two different forces? We got Islam and then socialist, communist are sort of, I don't know, coming together and morphing into some kind of super thing that is rolling over the world. Because I was studying this in Marxist language, they do have something called social murder. That's when someone is deemed an enemy of the people. It is right and necessary to kill that person, to take them out. And like you said, I think we're seeing this kind of indoctrinated in the colleges and maybe even in the high schools, is this kind of language. Like this Trump he's deemed an enemy of the people, and it's necessary to take him out because he doesn't agree with what we agree with. And that is really picking up steam, I think, all over.
It's even virtuous, right?
Yeah.
There's a certain group of people who would see it as virtuous that he's willing to do that. And it's interesting because, we would say that there's virtue in dying for a cause, but the problem is that the cause has to be a just cause in order for that to be the case. I mean, as an example, Christ died on the cross. And, the reason he died is so that he would take the sins of the world upon himself so that he could redeem his people. That was a just cause. And, the most just cause ever, most righteous cause ever. And yet, there were people who will die for what is an unjust cause. And in this situation, I think I know that's what we're seeing is we're seeing, people that are taking a vendetta. They have these vendettas and they want to, they act upon it, but it's unjust. It's an unjust, it's a skewed view of the world, if you will, that causes them and pushes into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we did a podcast on this, I forget how long ago, but where you talked about we are living in a culture of death. We have, abortion and now, elderly people taking their own lives in Canada. There's that assisted suicide kind of stuff going on. So we do see that. And I think it's gaining momentum in everything, right? It's just sort of picking up steam with everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think abortion opened the floodgates to that kind of stuff. That started obviously there was abortions before that, but it was legalized in 1973 with Roe v. Wade and has been legal in this country ever since. Even with the changes, what the Supreme Court did really just pushed it back to the states. And so, in many states, abortion is still legal today. And so, yes, I mean, we are a culture of death. And I think that we're a culture that doesn't value life at any level, unless it's deemed to be life that's advantageous. And so, as an example, someone who can be a quote unquote contributor to society is deemed to be worthy to live. But those who can't be, that take away from society, are more and more becoming marginal, and are being pushed to the margins. But not only pushed to the margins, but actually pushed over the edge. And they don't have a right to exist in our society, and that's a scary place to be. And that we would be there. Yeah.
So when we look at this Cole Thomas Allen, he is, like you said, Caltech, but it could have been a DEI. Are we looking at how he planned this as maybe he was a DEI because of the way you would think a Caltech guy would have, some kind of plan? Rather than just running into the place and just shooting randomly and trying to get into the auditorium, which there was no chance. Like his plan wasn't real good, is what I'm trying to say for someone who's a Caltech graduate.
The only thing about his plan that was good was that he actually went and stayed at the hotel, and which allowed him to kind of move around the hotel without suspicion. But other than that, and I think it got him at least as far as he went. But other than that, that was a poorly executed. Well, it was a poor plan that was poorly executed. So, he was just gonna outrun everybody, I guess, is what he was trying to do. And yeah, I mean that doesn't fit the personality of an engineer who is thinking through every detail and how to get by these the security without without being stopped. And, it just, I'm just going to run faster than everybody. And by the way, he ran pretty fast. So
yeah, I think he almost made it to the escalator, I think, which would have got him up into the. But this is the thing: how is he still alive? Like that to do something like that, you would think he would have been. I don't even know if he was shot. Was he? I think he was not shot. I don't know.
No, I don't think he was shot.
Like that's incredible.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what goes through. I mean, it's really going back to him. It's really a demonstration of depravity, and from a biblical worldview, we're seeing more and more of the depraved are. They're acting, according to their impulses. And so we're seeing that more and more and more. And I think as time goes on, we're going to continue to see it. I'm not a post-millennialist, so I don't think things are going to get better. I think it's going to proceed from bad to worse. And, what we're seeing now is better than what we'll see over the next 6 months or a year or 5 years or whatever, if the Lord tarries. And so, I just think that a lot of this stuff is definitely, I think it's becoming a more and more dangerous world, and so it's interesting, going kind of to the rhetoric that's out there. There's this big controversy about Jimmy Kimmel because he said something about Melania Trump, that she was an expectant widow, and he said that prior to the attempt, and then they ended up having the attempt, and so it's interesting that the question of freedom of speech comes up, and there are people that are saying that Jimmy Kimmel should be censored and that he should have to answer to that. And there's Christians that are saying that. And what's problematic about that is when you start limiting freedom of speech, it's limited. It's not just limited to what you don't want others to say. Now it's become limited as to what I can say. And I think I think we're in dangerous territory when we start limiting speech, even though we don't like it. Does Jimmy Kimmel have the right to say it? Yes, he does. Does ABC have the right to, or Disney have the right to air it? Yes, they do. We should show our displeasure by speaking against it, right? That it was not something he should have said, that it was wrong, and I'm fine with that. But to say that he can't say it and that he ought to be thrown in jail because he said it, that's a problem. And I know that's a little off topic, but it goes back to some of the stuff that we're dealing with as a country and as a culture, especially as God's wrath is being shown more and more towards us. So,
no, I think it's like anything. Free speech you have to be responsible. Like there's certain things that you just don't do. You don't go up to someone who had just lost a loved one by death and just start ridiculing them.
But it's not against the law.
No, it is not. But that's what I'm saying. There has to be some kind of restraint.
It's breaking decorum, but that's different than saying it's against the law. And so, it should be. They should feel the wrath of society when they say things that are not right. That people, good people should have to be willing to say, yeah, Jimmy Kimmel, you shouldn't have said that. That was wrong. But the right to say it is different than whether or not it should have been said. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think we're kind of saying the same thing because I was just thinking of the pronouns. Like there will probably be a law someday, I don't know when, maybe soon, I don't know. Whereas if you mispronounce someone, you go to jail and you may not even know what their pronoun is, but just things like that.
But that actually fits exactly what I'm saying because yeah, I mean, that's actually violating my freedom of speech. I should be able to use the pronouns that I shouldn't be dictated what pronouns I use, right? I mean, I shouldn't be dictated by society how I respond to someone, in that position. There is decorum, and that's, that when I say decorum, I mean that there's a, kind of an accepted way that I ought to speak, right? And that's acceptable in polite society. But at the same time, I still have the right to say things that maybe people don't like. And and the person who doesn't like it has the right to say they don't like it. And that's just what freedom of speech is.
Right, and I think that's what we're talking about here is worldly wisdom opposed to godly wisdom, and worldly wisdom results in disorder, division, chaos, and we see that right now, even with how we speak to each other and what we can and cannot say and how we say it. There's all this responsibility that we have as being free speech, all these things. There's a responsibility to that, but we're just kind of throwing that away because we don't. It's just so much chaos and division that it's hard to even be able to speak plainly anymore. Like you're always on edge when you're speaking to someone. Like, of course, now we're always being listened to by our phones and computer and whatever is listening to us somehow, somewhere, right?
You need to take the foil hat off.
No, but our phones are listening to us because it's happened to me where I've been talking to my wife saying, "What do you want for dinner? Let's get some pizza." And all of a sudden I get pizza ads on my phone. Like it just pops up.
Yeah, for sure.
Just like,
especially your phone. You have Android operating system. So they're definitely, Google is notorious for that kind of stuff. So, but
yeah, and I just found out today that Ford is installing in their 2027 cars. They're going to be able to listen to you in the cab, and they're also going to have cameras that will be able to look at your face and see if you're in stress, or it's in a way they're trying to make it good that if you're impaired by alcohol or whatever, it'll be able to read your pupils in your eyes, and so it won't start the car. But also it can hear what you're saying, and so some people have said, now the new cars have those little computer screens kind of in them. You ever seen those in the middle where it tells you stuff? The ads are popping up on there now.
Wow.
Or whatever they're talking about.
They actually, there's legislation right now that I think it's model year 26, I think it is, that they were mandating that cars have a kill switch based on driving patterns. And so if somebody's driving erratically, the car would shut the car down.
That's the pattern. So, yeah, that's what they were talking about today.
Yeah.
Don't buy a 2027 Ford.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's actually mandated. It's not just that Ford is doing it. It's actually a mandate that is out there that would say that that they would call for automobile makers to put this kill switch in based on erratic driving, and the idea is so that, like you say, the idea is to keep people from driving drunk, and which is a legitimate thing. I mean, in terms of we should be trying to stop people from driving drunk because it's so dangerous. But but to infringe on people's rights to do that is kind of a scary place.
How about this to knock your socks off? I was listening to this guy saying that it can also, what it does, if you get in your car, it scans your face, and if you have a warrant or anything, it will report to the police station. It will not start your car, and it will inform police, and they'll come and get you. Wow. That's how sophisticated it's getting.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah, and one guy was saying that he cuts wood out with his truck. He cuts wood out by his fence, and he said, if I ever cut myself, jumped in my cab and trying to get to the hospital, it'll look at my face and know I'm in distress, and it will not start the car. Well, I'm glad I have a 2013 car, but yeah, it's just all this stuff is happening. Like, I think we would both agree, because we are seeing the world going into disorder, division, chaos. We see the Bible predicting more things to be able to watch us and listen to us and just kind of crack down on us, right? That's what we see coming. And we see that with AI and everything, cameras.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, our world is becoming more and more complicated, that's for sure.
Oh, my word.
And so, really it's funny because I brought up John Wilkes Booth, and then compared him to this, to Harris is the last name, right? Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. What's that?
Cole Thomas Allen.
Oh, Cole Thomas, I'm sorry. So
he voted for Harris, though, but...
Oh yeah, he voted for Harris. That's what it was. But yeah, I mean, it's just a whole lot more complicated world now. And what's amazing is that he's not the only radicalized person out there, right? I mean, we're seeing these people over and over and over and over. And our system, the system of government, the system of education is radicalizing people at an alarming rate. And it's because, going back to the worldly wisdom, it's because they're being taught worldly wisdom and not biblical wisdom.
Yes, the outcome of worldly wisdom, again, we talked about disorder, division, chaos. Biblical wisdom creates righteousness and peace. And so Biblical wisdom focuses on God's eternal truth, his righteousness, and honoring him, whereas worldly wisdom, again, it's focusing on temporal gain, self-promotion, self-ambition, and there's a lot of envy, a lot of arrogance, and we're just seeing that all over in our world right now, and it's just amazing how people think that they are right and everyone else is wrong. Like, we just live in this world where if your politician or whoever is not elected and you think everyone else is insane and you're the only one who really knows the truth, and it's crazy. Yeah, I don't know where this goes as far as if Donald Trump can. He's got 2 years left in his term, and I know we've talked about it. I think a couple past podcasts. Like, will he have to go less in public and stay more in the White House? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I am concerned about the Secret Service and their ability to protect the president. I think it might be a matter of time before somebody actually succeeds in killing him, and which is going to create, if that happens, is going to create chaos, even more chaos. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it. I mean, they talked about the ballroom that he's having built, but that's not going to happen within his term. But part of the reason why they're justifying the ballroom is because it would be easier to secure it at the White House as opposed to having to use something like the Hilton Hotel there in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's just more and more a dangerous world for sure.
Yeah, and this is why we took time to do this today, because sometimes when you think of people assassinating somebody, it's like usually shoeless Billy Bob, somebody with a shotgun in their pickup truck, and kind of just not the brightest bulb in the pack. But
well, Hinckley comes to mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think most of these guys were mentally disturbed guys. Hinckley was definitely mentally disturbed. But again, you mentioned Booth, and he was an actor, but he was so self-absorbed. So maybe, I don't know, that has something to do with it.
Definitely self-absorbed, and he was definitely. I mean, there was definitely mental issues there.
I think Oswald was definitely not there. He was a smart guy. Oswald was smart too, and Oswald he was kind of a fruitcake too, and just caught up in this communist manifesto stuff that he was into. So yeah, I mean, these guys are just, I don't know. I'm sure they're, like you said, there's many more out there that are being radicalized right at this moment, and they're getting something in their brain is just telling them they got to do this, and they'll be a hero and they'll be loved and go down in history as this great guy. And it's just sad that worldly wisdom. Yeah, it's not from above, and it's not anything that's gentle, peace, or merciful. It's just the opposite, and so it's awful. So hopefully this was beneficial. It was just something we were talking about when it happened. Is like, man, this has happened again. Is it going to happen again? I don't know.
Yeah, if I were a betting man, I would say yes, that it will.
Another one.
This is not the last attempt on his life, and hopefully the Secret Service can protect him, and we won't see that happen. But yeah, it's something that seems to be happening more and more. And the question is, when it comes to our listeners, how do they respond? How should they respond? Well, I think it's doing the things that are faithful. Raising your families and the discipline and instruction of the Lord. It's speaking out for righteousness' sake. It's voting in a righteous way. It's all those things that we've talked about in the past that, as faithful Christians, we need to be sharing the gospel. We need to be preaching the gospel to a lost and dying world. And if we're going to die for a cause, that's the cause we should be dying for, is the ability to preach the gospel. That's why free speech is so important, in our nation, is because we need the freedom to be able to speak the gospel, even though some people would consider it hate speech. And in England, it is considered hate speech. So I don't know if the gospel itself is considered hate speech in England, but things that it naturally leads to are definitely considered as hate speech. And so, and I think we have to continue to, in the face of those challenges, we have to continue to be righteous, and that we continue to be salt and light in the world. To those who are lost and dying.
As pastors, we will continue to teach biblical wisdom from above, and not earthly, unspiritual wisdom. So yeah, we'll keep pressing on, And hopefully, but like you said, I don't know where this is going. I think it's just going to continue to get darker and darker. So, but
we ultimately know where it's going, but we don't know how it's going to get there exactly. So we don't know every detail, and we don't know the timing. How we'll go, but we do think that it's proceeding from bad to worse. But we need to be encouraged that means that we're closer to the day when it's going to be set right, like when Christ returns and makes all things. Sets all things right. And, all of this changes. The tide, at that point, officially changes and goes the other direction. And so we're just, right now the tide is rising and against us, but eventually Christ is going to return and it's going to go be opposite of that. And he is going to be standing for righteousness and he will prevail.
Wow, I couldn't have said that better myself.
Well,
you said that well.
You could have.
I always say what Angie sees in you, we see in you. We don't know what that is, but we see it. It's there. You've been listening to Fresh Bread, a podcast ministry of Grace Bible Church Gainesville. For more information, go to gracegainesville.org. And thanks for listening.